There is a place in the highlands of northern Ethiopia where 11 churches were carved, not built but carved, directly into the living red volcanic rock of a mountain. No stones were laid, no mortar was mixed. Workers descended into the earth and cut downward, removing millions of tons of rock to reveal the churches that, according to legend, were already waiting inside. They were built over 800 years ago, and every single one of them is still standing. No earthquake has collapsed them. No conqueror has demolished them. No empire has erased them. In a century when Notre Dame caught fire and the Bamiyan Buddhas were blown apart by explosives, these 11 churches carved into an Ethiopian mountain have endured, open, active, and full of worshippers since the year 1200. That is not an accident. That is a story. And it is one of the most extraordinary stories on earth. To understand what Lalibela is, you must first understand what Ethiopia was. By the 12th century, the Ethiopian highlands had been a Christian kingdom for nearly 800 years. Longer than most European nations have existed in any form. Christianity had reached this region in the 4th century, brought by Syrian missionaries, and absorbed into a civilization that had already been literate, urban, and powerful for 1,000 years before that. The kingdom of Aksum, which preceded medieval Ethiopia, had been one of the great powers of the ancient world. Its rulers minted their own coins. Its merchants controlled the Red Sea trade routes. Its scholars translated the Bible into Ge'ez, the classical Ethiopian language, while much of Europe was still illiterate. This was not a peripheral civilization. This was a civilization that considered itself, with considerable justification, to be at the center of the world. And at the center of its identity was a belief so extraordinary that visitors from Europe and Arabia struggled to process it. The Ethiopian church taught that the Ark of the Covenant, the gold-covered chest described in the book of Exodus as containing the tablets of the Ten Commandments, had been brought to Ethiopia by Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, that it rested still in the city of Aksum, guarded by a single monk who devoted his entire life to its protection, and who could never leave, and who upon his death would pass this responsibility to the monk he had chosen as his successor. This was a civilization that did not merely practice faith, it lived inside it completely. King Lalibela understood this. He ruled from approximately 1181 to 1221, and according to Ethiopian tradition, he had received a divine vision, a direct command, to build a new Jerusalem in the Ethiopian highlands. His reason was urgent and deeply human. The Christian city of Jerusalem had fallen to Saladin in 1187. For Ethiopian Christians, as for Christians across the world, this was a catastrophe. The holiest city in the world was gone, the pilgrimage routes were cut, and Ethiopia, landlocked, surrounded, separated from the rest of Christendom by hundreds of miles of desert and hostile territory, had no way to reach the original. So Lalibela decided to build a replacement. He named the river that ran through his capital, the Jordan. He named one of the church complexes Golgotha. He oriented the churches to mirror the sacred geography of Jerusalem itself, and he chose to carve them from rock, not build with stone, not construct with timber, because rock cannot burn, cannot rot, cannot be dismantled stone by an enemy army. He was not building for his reign. He was building for eternity. Stand at the edge of the largest trench complex and look down. The first thing you feel is vertigo. The rock has been cut away to a depth of more than 10 meters, roughly 4 stories, and at the bottom, rising from the floor of the trench, is Bet Medhan Alem, the house of the Savior of the world. It is the largest rock-hewn church on earth. Its roof is supported by 36 columns. Its exterior walls are carved to suggest the appearance of a conventional stone building, with blind arcading and decorative moldings, so that what you are looking at is a building that has been sculpted rather than constructed. Its every detail a subtraction rather than an addition. The workers who made this had no machinery, no cranes, no mechanical advantage beyond levers, ropes, and hand tools, and they could not make a single mistake. In conventional construction, if you place a stone badly, you remove it and replace it. Here, every cut was permanent. Every chisel strike removed material that could never be put back. The precision required, maintaining level floors, true vertical walls, correctly proportioned arches across a structure the size of a cathedral, in a medium that offered no forgiveness whatsoever, is almost impossible to fully comprehend. But the churches were built, and then almost immediately they were threatened. Through the 13th, 14th and 15th centuries, the Ethiopian Highland Kingdom fought a series of wars against neighboring Islamic sultanates that were, at several points, existential. Then in 1529, everything came to a breaking point. A military commander named Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known to Ethiopians simply as Gragan, the left-handed, launched an invasion that came closer to destroying the Ethiopian Christian kingdom than anything before or since. He was brilliant, he was ruthless, and he was winning. In the space of roughly a decade, his forces swept through the highlands, burning churches, looting monasteries, destroying the manuscripts and crosses and sacred objects that represented centuries of Ethiopian Christian civilization. Contemporary accounts describe monks fleeing into caves with their manuscripts, priests burying their processional crosses to prevent them from being melted down. Entire monastic communities were massacred. The Ethiopian king, reduced to a fugitive in his own highlands, sent desperate appeals to Portugal, the one Christian power with a presence close enough to help. The Portuguese came. A small force of several hundred musketeers arrived in 1541, commanded by Cristóvão da Gama, the son of the famous explorer Vasco da Gama. What followed was one of the strangest military campaigns in African history. Portuguese musketeers and Ethiopian highland warriors fighting side by side in a series of brutal battles that swung back and forth with terrible violence. Cristóvão da Gama was captured. He was tortured. He was executed. But Ahmad Gran was eventually killed by a Portuguese musket ball in 1543. The kingdom survived, barely. And Lalibela, the rock-hewn churches carved too deep into the mountain to be easily burned, too massive to be quickly demolished, survived with it. Move through the connecting tunnels that link the church complexes, narrow passages cut through the rock that pilgrims have been navigating for 8 centuries, and you reach the most dramatically situated of all the churches. Bete Georgis, the House of St. George, stands alone at the bottom of a pit, roughly 12 meters deep with perfectly vertical walls on all 4 sides. The church itself is a perfect cube. Its flat roof is carved with a pattern of 3 interlocking Greek crosses in relief. According to tradition, it was built last as a direct act of penance by King Lalibela himself. St. George appeared to the king and complained that none of the churches had been dedicated in his honor. Lalibela's response was to build the finest of them all. You approach it by descending a steep trench cut into the hillside. When you reach the bottom and turn to face it, the church fills its pit exactly, as though the rock arranged itself into this form and simply waited for someone to notice. There is no adequate preparation for this moment. Photographs do not capture it. Words barely do. It is one of those rare places where the only honest response is silence. The civilization that built Lalibela did not collapse after these wars. It endured. Ethiopia became the only nation on the African continent that successfully resisted European colonization in the 19th century. When Italian forces invaded in 1895, the Ethiopian army met them at the Battle of Adwa and handed them one of the most decisive military defeats in the history of colonial warfare, a victory that sent shockwaves through Europe and inspired independence movements across the entire African continent for generations. The churches were never taken. They were never abandoned. Every morning, priests in white robes and colorful umbrellas conduct services inside them. Pilgrims walk for days across mountain terrain to reach them. During the great festivals of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, Timkat at Epiphany, Jenna at Christmas, tens of thousands of people fill the carved trenches and courtyards and pray in ways that have not changed in 800 years. The sacred manuscripts written on goatskin vellum, illustrated with vivid pigments whose colors have barely faded across 7 centuries, are kept not in museums, but in the living custody of priests who use them still. The processional crosses that were buried in caves during Ahmad Gran's invasion came back. They are carried through the streets during festivals. They survived. There is a debate among historians and architects about how exactly the churches were built. Some believe the work took decades. Others argue that the reign of a single king was not long enough and that multiple generations contributed. There are scholars who point to differences in rock-cutting technique between the complexes, suggesting different teams, different periods, different hands. The full truth of how it was done, in what sequence, by how many people, directed by whom, remains genuinely unknown. That mystery is part of what Lalibela is. It does not give itself up completely. It keeps something back. On a cold morning in the rainy season, a priest in a white turban unlocks the wooden door of Beta Georgis, descends the ancient steps, and begins the morning liturgy in Ge'ez. The same language, the same words, the same melodies that have filled this carved stone space since the century it was made. The mountain holds its church, the church holds its faith, and the faith here has never wavered. If this journey into medieval Ethiopia moved you, let us know in the comments which lost world we should bring to life next.